From Timcast.com, cocaine found in the White House prompts evacuation. If it's the old executive office building, it's likely staff, tweeted Ari Fleischer. If it's the mansion, it's likely Hunter. It's amazing. The White House was evacuated around 8:45 p.m. on July 3rd after the substance was discovered by members of the Secret Service Uniform Division during a routine patrol of the building. The item was sent for further evaluation, and an investigation into the cause and manner of how it entered the White House is pending, the Secret Service said in a subsequent statement per NPR. The agency will review surveillance footage and visitor logs as part of its investigation. The location of where the cocaine was discovered has become a point of controversy. Initial reports claimed the drugs were discovered in the ground floor library of the presidential residence. The Washington Post quoted a dispatch from DC's Department of Hazardous Materials team in which a firefighter stated, "We have a yellow bar saying cocaine hydrochloride." Yeah, I saw this story over the weekend. It was like hazmat situation. And I can't remember who we were talking to, but they're like, "Oh, that sounds like something's actually happening." Turns out it was cocaine. And now they're saying it was in the West Wing. So it's kind of like either way, no matter where it was. Look, the highest probability is Hunter Biden. Hands down, no question. And they've said cocaine, but I'm wondering, could it have been crack or something? You know, the Timcast article from Hannah Claire mentions his crack cocaine addiction. We have an update on the story. Biden laughs off White House cocaine scandal and refuses to answer reporters' questions, while Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre suggests drugs found in West Wing belong to a visitor. I'm sure they did. This isn't the first time someone's claimed to have done drugs in the White House. I think Willie Nelson and Snoop Dogg claimed they did. I was talking about this earlier. And I was thinking about it, and I could be wrong, but my view of this whole thing is the founding fathers probably did a ton of drugs in the White House. Then there was probably a period from like the early 1900s to like the 70s where there were no drugs in the White House. And then you started getting probably a lot more drugs in the White House after that. I think.
Oh, John Kennedy, I think. I bet he partied hard. He would have like Marilyn Monroe over, didn't
that's
he?
True. And she was she did a ton of drugs.
You know, I don't know, because I actually had a good friend of mine who worked with me on the Trump campaign in 2016. She worked very, very hard. And because of that, she earned a White House job under President Trump. However, she tested positive for smoking weed, and that was yanked. No way, not getting in here. I don't know what the standards are for this White House, but I know historically that has not been tolerated. And
dude, if someone came to me and said Bill Clinton did not do drugs in the White House, I would bust out laughing. I'm sorry.
I imagine, I guess, back then.
I imagine someone like the president. Yeah, but what to your point, like if you're going to be in the Oval Office and stuff like that, even if you're some kind of clerk or something like that, you have to have some kind of clearance. And if you have any kind of drug history, or if you lie on the polygraph test, then you can't get a clearance. So it makes sense that there would be, issues with like your average person. If you're someone higher up, like if you're a chief of staff, or if you're the president, or if you're, someone like that, I imagine you could probably get the Secret Service to overlook or ignore or something like that. But if it's just your average, like one of the lower tier people that actually has to work for the president or in the office, I imagine they're getting tested, and because they have to have the clearance.
It's got to be somebody who doesn't have to go through security.
Yeah, or someone that has enough clout where if they go through security can't be like, yo, weird.
Yeah, because not only could Secret Service overlook it, they might also cover it up. And be like, hey, terrorism, everyone, look out. We got to mask up. This could be dangerous. Like, really? It's cocaine. Like,
nobody who has to go through security is bringing cocaine into the White House. I just, and what level of staff member has to go through security and would be like, I've got clout and I have to go to security and they're going to find out I have this, but they can't do anything. No way.
I bet there's a lot more than we realize. Just dudes just that are like addicted and they're like, I'm not doing another day without it kind of mentality.
Like, how does surveillance not catch it? But how does surveillance not catch it? Because, the Discord leaker of all those secrets, they found him real fast. But for some reason, they can't immediately figure out who dropped it in a certain room. Like there's parts of the White House that are not monitored, where the story is this is where tourists are allowed. So there are parts of the White House where a tourist can go and is not monitored. Does anyone really buy that?
Yeah,
really?
No way.
I think they know. I'm pretty confident they know exactly whose that belongs to. Good luck figuring out.
And I'm going to say this. They have surveillance all over that building.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that they do not is insane. We know they do. They have men on the roof. When you go and visit the White House, you can see there's guys up there. Okay, they're watching you, and they're armed,
and they've got sniper rifles.
Yes, they do. So if you're going to try and tell me they don't have surveillance in that building, that is untrue. So I'm going to say this: that suggests they know who did it, are covering it up. Therefore, it was Hunter Biden. I mean to say this. Let's clarify. I'm not saying I really believe it was Hunter. I don't know. I'm just saying until they actually come out and say whose it was, I am just going to say it was Hunter because, Occam's razor. Well, you got a crack addict, drug addict guy with access to the White House to the degree he will not be stopped by security. They know who he is, the president's son, and it's probably his.
Whether it's Hunter Biden or somebody else, what we do know for a fact is there's two tiers of justice. Just like Hunter Biden got treated very gently with his prosecution for his crimes, that other people are suffering badly for, losing their families, in jail for possession of cocaine in a place like that. Anybody else, even in your house, in your car, you park your car next to the White House and they find that in your car, you're in a world of pain. But the White House, one of the protected people, two-tier justice, we're just going to laugh it off.
Yep.
Jack Posobiec said he thought there's actually a 3-tier justice system. This is a little bit of an aside, but that there's the protected class, there's the plebes, the regular people like everyone else, and then there's the persecuted class, which is like a unique class like Julian Assange or at the moment Donald Trump.
Or J6ers.
Exactly. I guess so, yeah. Where it's like it doesn't really matter what you've done. They want it's personal kind of class of people.
There's the persecuted, the protected, and then the we don't care. The we don't care people can get scooped up and pushed around sometimes, and sometimes they get ignored. There might be someone who committed a crime, and they're like, oh, I don't know about this, whatever. Then you have the protected, the political elites and their cronies and their followers and worshipers. And then you, of course, have the persecuted, the people like the woman in Alaska whose home was raided because she looked like a woman who went in the Capitol building. That's crazy.
I actually went to the D.C. Gulag. I was allowed in to visit a prisoner. And just the fact, just going in was completely dehumanized. If you ever want to come in, I can get you in too. But I went there to meet a guy named William Cressman. This is a great example of what Jack was talking about. This guy has not been charged with any violence. He's a military veteran. He's not been charged with conspiracy or organizing anything. He's just a guy who showed up. He was arrested in January 2021. He still doesn't have a trial date.
Wow.
And they have denied him his psychiatric medicine. They have he's tried to keep journals and they just come through and throw all his papers away. He's not been given, he has 2 daughters that he had not seen for those 2 years plus, 2 young daughters. And he was finally going to get to see them the week after I was in to visit him. And that is just, whatever the wildest thing in the world they wanted to accuse him of, that they might even charge him with, he would have already had time served. But they're keeping him in there in dire conditions, still not a trial date. Military veteran, not charged with any violence because they can. Because not of what he did, but because of what he believed. And that's a great example of what Jack Posobiec's talking about.
Is this the indefinite detention because of the clause in like what the NDAA, I think?
No, it's worse. This is unjustified constitutional violations.
Speedy trial, man. It's right there.
So, where are we at? Is someone going to file a lawsuit or something to get some movement on this?
He's been doing his best. His lawyer's been doing his best, but they just keep blowing. Like I said, not even a trial date, not even bail. He's a clean record. He's a military veteran. He fought for this country overseas. And, the only thing that I've been doing a lot of things on this field. The last thing we have decided is that the only person who's really going to be able to make an effect on this is the next president. So we've launched a project called the J6 Question. We're paying $1,000 to anybody who will ask one of our presidential candidates what they're going to do for the J6 prisoners. And I'm very happy to say that today we actually cut our first check for $1,000. We announced the project 2 weeks ago. Somebody asked Asia Hutchinson, got it on video. We've been presenting it.
Wow.
So the only person who can really fix this is the next president. So we're going to get them on the record now so voters can be informed going to the ballot box in terms of how these people are going to handle what I believe is the greatest civil rights violation of our day.
How many people are in prison right now from January 6th?
We've got 141. In fact, there were 42 people just arrested last month. And
Whoa.
The DOJ has plans for another 1,000 to be arrested. There are a lot of them that are still in jail without a trial date, without any opportunity for bail, and they're just hanging out there.
How many people have been let go or have been released?
Quite a few hundred. The thing is, and this is the most disgusting part of it to me is that the Department of Justice's attitude is that you might be able to beat the charges, but you can't beat the ride, and you can't afford it. So a lot of people are just taking a plea agreement to just get out of it, even though they're not guilty. And in fact, I'm really have to admire William Cressman because he was offered a plea agreement. He had to do two things. He had to agree to the two lesser charges, and he had to condemn President Trump.
Wow.
And say that President Trump was the one that made him do it. And he said, that's just not true. And I'm not going to admit to something that isn't true. So he has put himself through this like a martyr. And I cannot wait for the day that he gets out and that he can tell his story publicly, because it's that was the ask. You have to condemn President Trump, and you have to plead to these other charges. I'm not guilty of any of it.
Dude, that's that Chinese version. I don't even want to blame the Chinese, but that weird like
communism.
What's that tactic where they come in and they make you say things that you know aren't true to break you, and then they're like re-education kind of mentality. I've never heard of that in the United States before. This is the first time. Maybe they did it to the Japanese internment prisoners during World War II.
Well, what they want to do is they're using these people as pawns in hopes that they turn on President Trump, because if they say, oh, I did it because President Trump told me, that makes it easier for them, the prosecution, to go after President Trump, say, hey, we got all these people telling him that you did this because...
Haven't people already done that, though?
Yes.
There were a handful of people who are like, oh, it was Trump's fault.
But remember, that's under severe duress, right? Because they're getting a deal because of it.
A lot of people think that Trump hasn't done enough to help those people.
What could he do?
I don't know. What do you get that vibe? What do you think he could do? Or
I don't know what he's done behind the scenes, but what I do know is the only person who can really do anything is the next president. And that's the only person who's got any ability to move this. And look, my take on it is that they should be given blanket pardons, especially because the vast majority of these people have not been charged with violence.
You think it's the next president? So like for 2 years, these people are just screwed? Like Biden, do you think there's any hope?
Like a little less than 2 years, like a year and a half. Right?
Is that what you told the guy when you went in? What was the guy's name again that you hung
William Cressman. And look, we have a J6 database at Look Ahead America, lookaheadamerica.org/J6. We have the most comprehensive database of everybody that's been charged, and it tells you whether they're arrested or anything like that. So if you want to help William Cressman, you can look him up there and send his attorney some money on his Give, Send, Go. But we have done, the good thing is the public's now on our side, because the plurality of people agree that these people are in fact political prisoners. But the Biden administration does not care. And the FBI, who are persecuting these people in the DOJ, they do not care, because there's no accountability. There's nothing you can do to stop them other than make an informed decision about the next president.
The fear...
Look, people love it when I say the magic words, civil war. But let's think about where we're at. At the very least, it may be a bleeding Kansas type phase, before, and maybe I'm wrong. In the 1820s, there was talk of civil war over the issue of slavery, economics, and the things around this. And it wasn't until 40 some odd years later that the war actually broke out. But we're at a point where federal law enforcement has, I don't think detained is even the right word, renditioned people without charge or trial. That's it. The Constitution is Swiss cheese. The idea that the DOJ can take people and hold them now more than 2 years later, often in solitary, which is torture, without charge or trial. Come on.
It's insane.
Iran only held our hostages for 444 days. These people have been in over for 800, still waiting on a trial date.
My guess is that the administration feels like if they're all let out and pardoned, that they think Trump will actually create a revolution, and they think that those people will be the foot soldiers. Well, and that's like such a dumb... I
think it's just intimidating other people. I really think that the reason that the people that are still in prison and for the J6 riot and stuff is just because they want the rest of America to be like, well, they don't care. They're not gonna observe your or respect your rights. They're going to hold you in violation of the Fifth Amendment, your right to a speedy trial and stuff. They're just gonna run roughshod over the Constitution. If the federal government feels it's acceptable to kill a U.S. citizen because they have a suspicion that they're a terrorist, or because they don't like some of the things that they were saying, then I don't think that it's ridiculous to think that the government wants to use its power to intimidate other Americans.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, man. It's they don't want anyone to riot. They don't want anyone to even protest at the White House. I don't think they want anyone near it.
I don't know about anyone. They just don't want the right to.
Yeah,
because if it was the left, they would let. They would. If it was Antifa, they. I mean, there's history. There is a past history, demonstrably, that they will not arrest people on the left in the same manner and with the same vigor and with the same malice that they arrest people on the right. There were people rioting all over Washington, D.C. Was the 29th of May of 2000 or whatever, or 2020. What was when they...
was it May 29th, I think?
I
think 29th, whatever.
529.
But the people...
I talk about this a lot. The reason why Blackstone's formulation was so important, the reason why we have the right to a speedy trial, innocent until proven guilty, the Founding Fathers believed that if people could be held criminally in prison or jail, even if they were innocent, there would be no incentive to be a good citizen if at any point you could be arrested. This is why it's better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent person suffer. Because if people believe if I'm truly a good person, the system will protect me, now we can see the inversion of that.
Yeah, that's why
they don't care, but here's the important point. If people start to believe, and unfortunately it's true, that no matter what you do, the Biden administration, the cult, these evil, depraved people are going to use the weight of force against you, there is no incentive to negotiate. The point is, This is the behavior that, like any other domino collapse, leads to governmental collapse. You can see it in all these other countries. What happens in Syria? You get protesters. The Assad regime, whatever you want to call it, says we are going to stop these people, creating a backlash. Occupy Wall Street, best example. About 1,000, 2,000 people are marching down the street. Anthony Bologna, the cop, walks up to 3 random women who were not a part of the march and pepper sprays them because they were yelling. The video goes viral. The fastest viral video in history at that point, 1.2 million views in less than a day, in like 12 hours. Igniting Occupy Wall Street across the country. When law enforcement uses heavy-handed tactics, it is a spark on kindling. And what scares me about what we're seeing with the Biden administration and the J6ers is that it's sending a message to people not to be scared of them, but that they are illegitimate. They will not follow the rule of law. They will not give you a fair trial. Therefore, there is no system by which you were involved. It is no different than a group of muggers beating you mercilessly in the street. There's no rhyme or reason other than they want to assert power over you. This is one more domino falling all over towards a potential civil war in this country.
Yeah, this is why I use the word dumb when I talked about these tactics of like they're afraid these people will become Trump's foot soldiers if they're all let out and pardoned. The problem is you're creating the problem that you're afraid of by incarcerating them without a trial or without even a charge, because it's radicalizing them in prison. And when they come out, their families will remember and their friends will remember. And you're radicalizing an entire population and an entire 50 years worth of people by violating their constitutional rights. You need to trust the populace. Maybe being in the government is not a realm of trust. You're afraid and you're always on the defensive. Perhaps that's part of why I don't run on that.
History shows that there's a silver lining to this, because how many of the great leaders who've done wonderful things for their country at some point in their early life were political prisoners, like Mandela or Martin Luther King, or in India, Veer Savarkar. That's a pattern throughout history of great positive revolutionary leaders at some point crossed a civil disobedience line or crossed the administration and ended up in prison. And that you can see that in countries all over the world. I don't think we're quite at civil war yet, and because here's the problem as I see it as a community organizer, somebody that does voter registration and voter turnout. In the Georgia Senate runoff, in the urban counties, the progressive urban counties, turnout was in the mid-80s. In the rural counties, where I think at least as many voters are, turnout was in the mid-50s. And there you have the outcome of the election. If turnout in those rural counties was anywhere close to the urban areas, those people would have a louder voice. But unfortunately, they do not turn out. They're not part of the ballot harvesting machine. They're not part of the voting culture. And that's where I'm putting my effort to try to change. I wouldn't do too well in a civil war. I've got terrible vision. But in terms of community organizing and in elections, I think it's there if we just have to seize it. And our constituency is disaffected, patriotic Americans of rural and blue-collar backgrounds. And the best example of somebody like this from history is Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. From a poor background, probably her family didn't own that farm. They were at the whims of much more powerful forces in the economy and in the government. And she was just blown off with a tornado to some foreign land where she had absolutely no control and no power. But what she realized by the end is that she had the power all along in her ruby slippers, and she just needed to tap them together and say, home sweet home. If we can just get our people in the same way to recognize if they cast those ballots, an informed ballot, and get engaged with the process, they can solve their problems.
How do you feel about voting machines? Like, I'm very concerned about proprietary voting machines where we can't see the code, so we don't know if they're flipping vote tallies in the background. How do you foresee a solution to at least create transparency so that we know for sure that it's giving us accurate vote tallies?
So I have documented cases where the voting machines made a mistake. And there was a county where this happened. It was caught and it was fixed. But what I think is the solution long term is to insist on open source voting equipment. Hand count, that's technically open source. And even if you don't believe, because all of these Democrats and leftists were saying before 2020 that, I see these machines changing votes right in front of my eyes. Kamala Harris said that herself. And there's a documentary on HBO, and now they're all denying it. But even if you don't believe that, there's a lot of good reasons to switch to open source voting equipment, which is that it's a hell of a lot cheaper. It's like half the cost. And when you get proprietary equipment, you're locked into that company maintaining it, fixing it, updating it forever. And that gets very expensive. It's a monopoly. Whereas if it's open source, you can have an in-state tech company. You can create in-state jobs to maintain it and update it. And I'll tell you, it's really more of a Republican issue now, but there was a Democrat in Congress who is a scientist. And he actually proposed a law mandating that all voting equipment be open source. So even in places like California, we're making progress on that front. And honestly, I have not seen any evidence of machines intentionally changing the outcome of a vote, and I've seen a lot of evidence to the contrary. But it's really about restoring trust of the public. They need to believe it. They need to have a Matt Brainerd walk in and see, oh yes, these machines are correct. The code is right. It's doing what it says it can do, to restore their trust in the voting system. And I think that's why so many on the left oppose it, is because they don't want the trust restored, because they want people discouraged from voting.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.